Story 1. I came to the mountains to disappear. The cabin, a sagging, beetle-stained box, sat 3 miles off the last road in Harlan County, Kentucky. The realtor called it rustic charm. I called it a rental I couldn't afford. But the rent was paid up front, and the locals, weathered faces in pickup trucks, didn't ask questions. They just warned me not to wander beyond the cleared ridge. Said the woods don't like strangers. I laughed. City boy reflex. First week I heard the whispers. They came at dusk, threading through the pines like dry leaves rubbing together. I told myself it was the wind. Then came the knocks, sharp, deliberate, on the cabin's water-stained walls. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. I'd found no trails, no signs of life beyond my porch. The nearest neighbor, an old woman named Ms. Bell, refused to look at me when I met her at the general store. "Some hollows," she muttered, "are best left empty." On the 12th night, the cold seeped into my bones even under blankets. I woke to the sound of a child's voice, low and wet, singing a hymn off-key. My flashlight flickered as I followed the sound to the living room. The sliding glass door hung ajar, snow fluttering in. On the porch, a doll lay half buried in the drifts, its porcelain face cracked, one button eye missing. The knocks returned at midnight. This time, they spelled a word in Morse code I'd learned in college. Come. I didn't. But I couldn't sleep. At dawn, I ventured into the woods. The trees closed in, their trunks knotted like arthritic fingers. Birds fell silent as I hiked, until only my breath echoed. Then, a clearing. And the figure. It stood at the center, back to me, wearing a tattered gray dress, its head swiveling slowly, as if it had heard me but wasn't surprised. A child, maybe 7, its face pale and smooth as ash. It pointed, a skeletal finger, to the ridge. When I stepped closer, it mimicked me, stepping back. A mirror. "Who are you?" I croaked. It didn't answer. It didn't need to. The air thickened, pressing against my lungs. The doll's song hummed in my skull. I ran, crashing through brambles until I stumbled into the cabin, locked the doors, and listened for the whispers to return. They didn't. For 3 nights, there was silence. I packed my things, planning to flee at first light. But at 3:17 a.m., I saw the headlights. 2 sets, one on the road below, Ms. Bell's truck, idling. The other, higher up, beyond the ridge. I didn't sleep. At dawn, I took the key to the door and the flashlight and drove down the mountain. Ms. Bell didn't look up from her coffee when I arrived. "You shouldn't have gone in there," she said. "But you're here now. That's something." When I look back, her porch light is always on. And sometimes, in my rearview mirror, I catch a flicker, a shadow on the ridge, small and still, waving. I keep driving. The mountains follow. Story 2. I was supposed to be leaving the mountains before the snow came. I had a deadline for the photo essay I was doing on abandoned coal towns. One last shot of a place called Harlan's Hollow, a settlement that vanished in the early 70s when the mine closed. The road that led there was a thin ribbon of asphalt cut through a forest that seemed to fold in on itself, and the GPS kept flickering between no signal and the word recalculating. A mile before the bend where the map stopped, I pulled into a dusty pull-off and met an old man in a flannel shirt, his hands thick with callus. He introduced himself as Earl, a lifelong resident of the ridge. When I mentioned Harlan's Hollow, his eyes narrowed. "You don't want to go there after dark," he said, voice low. "There's a spot that swallows up the whole world. Folks who go in never come back the same. You can see it if you look right, but you can't look away." His warning felt like the rambling of an old-timer's tale, but there was a weight to it that didn't fit any folklore I'd read. He offered a thermos of coffee, and before I could decline, he turned and walked back toward the forest, disappearing into the mist that rolled in from the valley. I took a sip, felt the bitterness on my tongue, and felt a sudden compulsion to keep moving. I thought, I'm a journalist, not a superstitious hillbilly. I'll be fine. I drove the last half-mile on a road that was nothing but a gravel wash, the trees closing in like a cathedral. When I turned onto the old logging trail that led to the hollow, my headlights cut through a thick fog that seemed to huddle around the car, clinging to the metal as if it were a living thing. The silence was oppressive. No birds, no insects, just the low hum of the engine and the occasional crack of a distant branch. I stepped out, the cold air biting my cheeks. The hollow was a bowl of cracked foundations and shattered windows, half overgrown with kudzu and the skeletal remains of a once busy main street. My camera was ready. I set a tripod in front of the old post office and began snapping. The first few shots were ordinary. Broken signage, rusted railings, a single broken chair tipped over. Then, as the shutter clicked, a low, resonant thrum rose from the ground beneath my feet. It sounded like distant machinery, but there was no source. I paused, heart thudding, and looked down. The fog at my knees seemed to ripple, as if a hand were moving through a liquid. A shape, indistinct at first, rose from the mist. A silhouette of a man, taller than any I'd seen, its edges smudged like charcoal in water. He stood there, staring directly at me. I raised my camera, but the lens refused to focus. The viewfinder filled with static, a grainy wash of gray. Don't, a voice whispered, not from the figure but from the wind itself, though it carried no vowels. My breath came out in a ragged gasp. The silhouette tilted its head, as if amused, then dissolved into the fog, leaving behind a faint scent of damp earth and old coal dust. I didn't wait to see if it would return. I sprinted back to the car, the engine sputtering as the cold bit into the metal. The road seemed longer, the fog thicker, as if it were swallowing the distance. When I finally cleared the hollow, the sky was a bruised violet, the sun a thin sliver on the horizon. I drove straight to the nearest town, a place called Rattlesnake Ridge, where I found a small diner still open. I told the waitress what I'd seen, expecting a chuckle or a shake of the head. She stared at me, eyes wide, and spoke in a whisper. You saw the gap. It's been there since the mines closed. No one knows why it takes people. Some leave it alone. Some come back changed. I never published the photo essay. The pictures I took of Harlan's Hollow are all blank, just static on the memory card. I've kept my car a mile away from that road ever since, and I never answer a stranger's question about why I'm still alive. The mountains hold many secrets, but the one I witnessed has no name in any legend. It just exists, a dark pocket in the world that swallows light, and it will stay that way unless someone else decides to look. Story 3. I was supposed to be home by midnight. The job, checking the seasonal trailgate on the Blue Ridge, kept me on the ridge longer than I'd planned. The mountain air was thin, the sky a bruised violet, and the only sound was the low wind humming through the spruce. I'd been on this stretch for 3 weeks, a solitary patch of gravel and old flagstone that few ever saw. The locals called it the blind spot, because the trees closed in like a wall, hiding the road from anyone driving down Route 19. When I pulled the gate down, I heard an old pickup sputter down the gravel and stop. A weathered man in a faded work shirt leaned out of the cab, his eyes a pale, tired gray. "Evening, son," he said, voice gravelly as the trail. "You're the first person I've seen up here after sundown in years. You out here alone?" I nodded, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Just checking the gate. Got a storm coming in, so I'm heading back soon." He stared at the ridge, the dark mouth of the valley below swallowing the last light. "You don't want to be out after the sun goes down. Folks who stay past dark, they hear things, not the usual critters. I've seen men turn pale and walk off the trail and never come back. You're better off getting out before the fog rolls in." I laughed, half joking, half nervous. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. He simply tipped his cap and drove away, the tail lights disappearing into the black. The wind picked up, and a low, wet murmur rose from the thicket. I turned to the gate, but the metal bar looked wrong, twisted, as if someone had forced it from the inside. The fog rolled in like a cold breath, sliding over the ridge, muffling my footsteps. I could hear something moving among the trees, a soft rustle, a dragging sound, like a sack of wet burlap being pulled across pine needles. It was too deliberate to be an animal. It seemed to be following a pattern, circling the gate. My radio crackled with static. The signal was dead. I tried the flashlight, but its beam cut through only a few feet before the fog swallowed it again. Then, from the periphery, I saw a shape. Tall, gaunt, shoulders hunched, moving with a slow, shuffling gait. No face was visible, just a dark void where a head should be. The figure stopped at the edge of the trail, turned, and stared directly at me. Its eyes were nothing but black holes that seemed to drink the feeble light. A cold sweat ran down my spine. I took a step back, then another, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. The figure didn't move toward me, but it didn't back away either. It simply stood, as if waiting for something to happen. The wind whistled through its ragged coat, making a sound like distant sighs. In a panic, I ran, the gate slamming behind me as if someone had kicked it. I didn't look back. The fog was a wall of white that seemed to pulse with each breath I took. When I finally reached the road, the night was gone, sunrise breaking over the valley, painting the ridge gold. I drove away without stopping, the old man's warning echoing in my mind. I never went back to that part of the trail, and I never told anyone exactly what I saw. Some say the mountain is just full of wind and shadows. Others whisper about the Watcher on the ridge. I can only say this. When the fog rolls in and the wind carries that wet, dragging sound, I feel a cold hand on my shoulder, reminding me that some things in the Appalachians are better left unseen.